objected to returning Jewish children to the Jewish community in the aftermath of the Holocaust. We now have formal information about that. And the reason they did it was theological, because they believed that if somebody converts they believed at that point that if somebody converted to Catholicism, that his soul was saved and he would then be able to achieve immortality. Therefore, going back to being a Jew after you've been baptized, even forcibly baptized, from a Roman Catholic point of view of that generation, was a bad thing, a negative thing. In 1945 and 46, Jews tried to find Jewish children, most especially, who were hidden. So what did they do? They searched in convents, in monasteries. Sometimes a rabbi came in and asked the question, do you know what this is? Or do you know what Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is? And if a kid responded, then they understood the child was Jewish. Some Catholic leaders, but not the Pope, allowed Jewish children to return to the Jewish community. The best example of that was Archbishop Angelo Roncalli in France, who later became John the 23rd. The Pope objected to that. Now we know one other thing. There was a direct conversation between the Pope and the chief rabbi of then Palestine, Rabbi Isaac Herzog Halevi. And Rabbi Herzog came out of the conversation with the Pope and had a one-sentence response to what he had heard. He'd come there to ask for the Pope's help in returning Jewish children to the Jewish people. He came out and he told the man who was accompanying him, take me to the mikveh. I have to undergo cleansing from this meeting. That's how corrupted he felt in the aftermath of the meeting. The second thing we discovered was very, very important. I'll tell it to you in a short story, but maybe you want to translate the first part first.
Go ahead, Tocayo. Tocayo. Okay.
I'm sorry, the microphone was off, but es bastante difícil de explicar toda la conversación, pero básicamente la idea que Michael explica es de que los archivos estuvieron abiertos por 5 días y fue muy difícil ver todo lo que se podía ver. Entonces, en esos 5 días, lo que pudieron ver fue las acciones de la Iglesia Católica por parte de Pío XII fueron muy importantes en el sentido de que no ayudaban, sino la posición de él estaba muy complicada en el sentido que no quería favorecer por un lado a los judíos y tampoco quería estar contra los nazis. Pero había unas historias muy dedicadas específicamente con los esfuerzos de la Iglesia Católica de poder bautizar a cientos o a miles de niños en Europa, y después de la guerra muchos de esos esfuerzos de bautizo no querían que se reuniera a estos huérfanos del Holocausto, de la Shoah, con sus padres, ¿no? Entonces fue parte de los que se ven en los archivos hoy en día. Y el rol que también jugó Pío XII en 1943, cuando le piden que hable en favor de los judíos, cuando los nazis toman control de Italia, cuando cae Mussolini, ¿no? En ese sentido, ¿no? Listo, yo ya no me acuerdo de más que haya dicho Michael.
No, sí, mencionó también que lo abrieron únicamente durante 5 días y que ha sido muy complicado porque la gran mayoría de los escritos están en latín, en italiano, en alemán, en polaco, en francés, y que, bueno, que deberá de pasar más tiempo para que puedan esclarecer muchas dudas, pero que es un buen principio, ¿no? Sí.
The second piece that we discovered in the Vatican archive needs a little bit of background. In August 1942, The date is very important. In August 1942, the State Department had a conversation with Rabbi Wise, Stephen Wise, in which he brought to the State Department a telegram that he had received, informing him that Germans were planning the final solution to annihilate 3.5 to 4 million Jews at one point, once and for all, to end the Jewish problem in Europe, to solve the Jewish question. It was even called the final solution to the Jewish problem, and that they were speaking of Zyklon B, which is prussic acid, and Rabbi Wise brought it to the State Department, and they had used very specific language in the telegram. They said, "We transmit this information with all due deliberation, as exactitude cannot be confirmed. Informant is said to have contact with the highest echelon in Führer's office, and his reports have generally been deemed reliable." The State Department asked Rabbi Wise not to go public with the information, and Rabbi Wise couldn't go public with the information because it wasn't confirmed. What we found is that one of the ways, and then 3 months later, in November 1942, the State Department informed Rabbi Wise, "We can confirm your darkest fears." In other words, they confirmed the Holocaust, that Jews were being systematically annihilated. What makes it interesting is that we now know that one of the places they went to confirm what was happening to the Jews was the Vatican. One of the sources information that they used to confirm that this happened was the Vatican, and still the Pope did not speak out. The third incident we have is the most controversial incident that we have because it occurred under the very windows of the Vatican, which is the deportation of the Jews from Rome. In 1943, the Jews were deported from Rome. Rome is where the headquarters of the Vatican are. And there's a range of discussions. Did the Vatican help the Jews? Did the Vatican offer some gold to bribe the Nazis to withstand it? Or did the Pope remain silent while this was taking place and not condemn it? And David Kurtzer, one of the researchers, came in and found evidence that there were people who wanted to pressure the Pope to speak out, and there were people who said, "Don't speak out," and the Pope chose not to speak out.
Ok. Básicamente lo que Michael quiere decir es dos incidentes o dos resultados de lo que vio en los archivos fueron que en 1942 hubo ya reportes a los diferentes gobiernos en Inglaterra y otros lugares donde confirmaban la noticia de que se estaban exterminando judíos en campos de exterminio, y que una de las fuentes más verídicas de esto fue personal del Vaticano a través de toda la red organizada que tenían en todos los catedrales, provincias, iglesias, monasterios, que había testigos de esto. Y como el Vaticano sabía esto, se le instó al Vaticano a protestar o decir algo, y el Vaticano, por órdenes de Pío XII, nunca hizo nada ni lo quiso decir. El tercer incidente que ya me referí hace un momento fue en 1943, cuando estaban ocupando los nazis Italia, en el cual el Vaticano, que sucedió básicamente unas cuadras del Vaticano, donde reunieron a los judíos que posteriormente mandaron a Auschwitz y a otros campos de exterminio. Pío XII decidió tampoco hablar, tampoco decir nada. Y hay unas historias de algunos bishops, ¿cómo se llama? Bishops, cardenales y padres y eso, que sí hicieron eso a pesar de que no hubo ningún decreto de Papa Pío XII, ¿no? Bueno, yo creo que I don't know what you think, Michael, but we can start probably in a minute or so the documentary. The documentary is long, it's about an hour and 40 minutes. And after the documentary, whoever wants to have questions and answers, and we have the chat and the Q&A sections of the Zoom, they can ask throughout the documentary or afterwards. And básicamente vamos a iniciar el documental que Michael produjo con la liga que hay en Vimeo que ustedes ya vieron en el chat. Dura 1 hora 40 minutos el documental y posteriormente vamos a tener una sección de preguntas y respuestas, pero pueden preguntar a lo largo del documental algunas preguntas, ya sea en el chat o en la sección de preguntas y respuestas. ¿Tocayo?
Sí, y vamos a tratar de hacer una selección de las mejores preguntas para poder responderlas. Entonces son las 6:01, el documental dura 1 hora 40, nos vemos aquí a las 7:45 aproximadamente. 7:45, en 1 hora con 45 minutos para responder preguntas.
Está
Michael,
subtitulado al inglés.
sí. Michael, thank you very, very much. We enjoy every word you say.
Time. And after
okay, and I will be back in 1 hour and 40 minutes to
Yes.
answer whatever questions you need.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much, as always. Listos, empezamos la función.
If there were witnesses from the extermination camps and more the crematoriums, why all these Sonderkommandos that they were alive at the time of the Deborah Lipstadt trial, they didn't testify?
That's a very good question. The decision was made during the Deborah Lipstadt trial. The decision was made during the Deborah Lipstadt trial not to put the Holocaust on trial, but to put David Irving on trial.
Right.
And there's a difference. So what we did is, and I was involved in helping some of the research team, somebody went through all of the footnotes in David Irving's writings and came to the original documents and showed how he misquoted it. Someone went through the design of the crematoria and all of the ways in which it had been portrayed and showed how he misdescribed it. So the idea was not to put the Holocaust on trial, but to show the falsification involved with David Irving. And that didn't need the Sonderkommando. It needed merely showing what a faker, what a falsifier, what a liar, what a misrepresenter, and what a racist was David Irving was. And that's the reason why I never referred to it as the Lipstadt trial. I always refer it as the defeat of David Irving. I know Deborah Lipstadt. I like Deborah Lipstadt. I've known her since we were young people. But this is the defeat of David Irving because we showed David Irving to be a complete liar.
Okay. So, para explicar, la pregunta era, en el famoso juicio de Deborah Lipstadt con David Irving, que era el negacionista de la Shoah, una película hace un par de años, la pregunta fue ¿por qué los Sonderkommandos o los prisioneros de los crematorios no testificaron? Y aquí Michael contesta que el juicio de difamación de Deborah Lipstadt por David Irving era verdaderamente no poner la Shoah, el Holocausto, en juicio, sino poner a David Irving como un mentiroso, como un falso personaje que quería decir que el Holocausto no existió. Entonces, toda la construcción del juicio se hizo para ponerlo en ridículo y demostrar que era un falsificador y no poner en duda la existencia del Holocausto. Yeah.
We have a question that a D. Dunn has asked. Of course, the Holocaust is based on hate, but after watching this extraordinary document, I wonder how much the economic benefit to the perpetrators and bystanders was a factor in its success. The answer to that is the Holocaust was not only the greatest murder, it was one of the greatest robberies imaginable, and it benefited a whole range of people, from individual Nazis who developed incredible art collections, incredible stamp collections, incredible book collections, to the government of Germany, which used the recycled gold from the teeth in order to provide for foreign currency, to museums that became the beneficiary of the art that had been stolen and that is still stolen today, to insurance companies that benefited from not having to pay payments, from also in the aftermath of it not paying life insurance policies because you couldn't provide a certificate of death, to the individual soldiers who took what they wanted, and then also to the bystanders, meaning to not to the bystanders, to the people who were in the areas in which Jews were murdered, who got their apartments, who got their businesses, who got their clothing, who got their towels, who got all of their material possessions. And remember, even a poor person has not insignificant material possessions. Everything from dishes to pots to linens to all of the things that you need.
Okay.
Let me translate.
Good.
Ok, dice que lo que pasa es que finalmente la guerra es un negocio y mucha gente se benefició de este negocio, en el cual desde luego los perpetradores se robaron obras de arte, colecciones de monedas, de timbres, una serie de todo lo que pudieron robar, incluyendo el oro ya sea de joyería o inclusive el oro de los dientes que fue enviado a Alemania para ser cambiado por reservas de oro y demás. Y desde luego que también la gente que vivía en los lugares donde sucedieron las matanzas se quedaron con las casas de la gente, con sus propiedades, con su ropa, desde las cosas más insignificantes como platos, cubiertos y demás, que para un campesino, pues eso es cualquier cosa que puedan darle es ganancia. Y entonces, por eso que ellos eran también observadores pasivos, que se veían cómo se llevaban a la gente, y desde luego unos eran víctimas y los otros eran ganadores de los bienes de esas víctimas. En resumen, eso es lo que dijo.
And Michael, I have a question for you. Is now that there are very few survivors and even less perpetrators in this world, how much more difficult is the life of educators like you or Bauer and some of the giant scholars living today like you in the Holocaust, and we as humble, Jaime and I, follow your footsteps? How difficult is going to be to teach about the Shoah? And more important, I think, is how difficult it is to convince the rest of the world not to be bystanders in all the different crimes and problems like Syria, like even today in the US or Mexico. I mean,
well, you've asked a very important question. Let's answer it generally. We are moving from lived history to historical memory. That in one sense means that the historian has to use the tools of the historical craft in order to do the teaching that's involved. We're also at another stage in which the survivor's testimony has been gathered in a way that is in a quantity that is unimaginable to any other historical event. Let me give you an example. In the United States, there are only 36 oral histories on tape of people who once were slaves. 36. We have well in excess of 80,000 video interviews with Holocaust survivors. Nobody has gone through this material yet, except if they're working on one or another project, they then go through the material. One of the things this documentary was able to use for the first time in public And this answers Stephanie's question, how did we get cooperation of the partners? Well, one of the things that all Holocaust institutions try to do is to make material available to the public. So this was the first time we were able to use the outtakes, the material that Claude Lanzmann did not use in his film, which are now available at Yad Vashem, now available at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum for use. And that's why you had the great scholar Raoul Hilberg able to give narration, and Hilberg died 10 years ago. And consequently, we have a new situation in which material is available, and we understand it. Last point is that it is always more difficult because a living witness is different than a witness who's presented on tape. The only advantage we have is that good filmmakers know how to edit the witness. And the other thing is a film works every time. And even the best survivors as teachers have some good days and bad days, have some days in which they are not quite feeling well enough to tell their story. So we have to make material from this available for education so that education can function. Let me let you translate that.
Okay, basically, la pregunta fue, ya que casi no hay sobrevivientes, ya que casi no hay perpetradores, ¿qué herramientas o cómo podemos seguir adelante enseñando la Shoah, enseñando que no deberíamos de ser testigos pasivos o gente que ve pasivamente los eventos? Y Michael nos relata que hoy más que nunca ningún evento histórico ha sido tan documentado como la Shoah, que existen nada más 36 documentaciones orales de gente que fue esclavo. Y hoy en el Holocausto, solo en Estados Unidos, hay más de 80,000 entrevistas que nunca se han verdaderamente explotado de sobrevivientes. Y parte de este documental fue la idea de que se queden testimonios. Y son las herramientas que contamos de una memoria histórica, de una historia que cuentan y relatan los sobrevivientes a una memoria histórica, en la cual se hace más complicado, pero hay muchas herramientas audiovisuales y escritas sobre la Shoah. But Michael, the question I didn't get, for me the answer is, how do we teach not to be passive bystanders?
By example, and we have to do two levels. We have to inform the people intellectually, and we have to move them emotionally. You know, I was asked a question the other day, maybe Holocaust education is a failure because anti-Semitism is on the rise and prevalent. And I said to that, we don't know what would have happened to anti-Semitism without the example of the Holocaust. And B, we know that people who have confronted the Holocaust have made major progress in dealing with the question of anti-Semitism. So we have to essentially, they once said of Eleanor Roosevelt, she would rather light a candle than curse the darkness. And there's a very great statement by a rabbi in the Talmud, Rabbi Tarfon, who said, it is just because you can't complete a job doesn't make you free from beginning it and taking it forward. In other words, we may not be able to make everybody into upstanders and not bystanders, but we have great evidence in very many cases of people who have been moved to do it, who have been moved to change because of the Holocaust. Let me give you my most personal example. I was in Rwanda in 1994, right after the genocide. And I went into my hotel, and a young woman comes into the hotel, and she puts her arms around me and kisses me on both cheeks. I look at her, and I don't, for a moment, know who she is. And then she said, I was a student in your class in 1984. This is 10 years before. And I remembered immediately who she was. And she had subsequently become was a Doctor Without Borders, was with an organization, the Doctors Without Borders, and Médecins Sans Frontières. And she decided after my class, she said, when the American Marines came to take Americans out, she decided that she had to remain. And the reason she had to remain is because she had taken a class in the Holocaust. In 1984, I had a very special experience because one of my students in 1984 was a survivor of the Cambodian genocide of 1979. A young and beautiful Asian woman. And she came to I made my students adopt a survivor. She came to my office one day, she said, can I tell my story? And I said innocently, what's your story? She told me she was in the Cambodian genocide. She was a victim of the Cambodian genocide, lost her father, lost her sister. I said, by all means. And what I did was to allow her to teach. I threw out the curriculum. And for 3 different sessions, for 6 hours, she told her story, and everybody in the class had tears. And the end result of which is that one of the young women in that class later became a doctor, did not take the easy way out of Rwanda, stayed there as a doctor. All that because what? She had taken a course which taught her how to be an upstander and not a bystander, how not to flee, but to help. That's my personal example.
Ok. ¿Quieres traducir, Tocayo, o lo traduzco?
No, vas tú.
Ok. La pregunta para Michael fue, ¿cómo los que se dedican, y nos incluimos nosotros humildemente, a la educación del Holocausto, cómo podemos tratar de que no haya observadores pasivos? Michael relata que él estuvo en 1994 en Ruanda, donde asesinaron a más de 500,000 personas a machetazos. Él estuvo en 1994 y se encontró ahí una persona cuando llega al hotel que le da un beso en las 2 mejillas y no se acordaba quién era, y resulta que esa persona había tomado un curso con él en 1984 y de ahí se dedicó a ser doctora, los doctores sin fronteras. Y a través de esa clase dijo Michael que ella decidió, en vez de ser un observador pasivo, se volvió un activo porque nunca abandonó su profesión de doctora durante el genocidio de Ruanda. Y también le sucedió que en ese curso había una mujer asiática que quería contar su historia y resulta que esa mujer fue sobreviviente del genocidio de Camboya en 1979 y cinco años después estaba en la clase y al contar su historia dice que él está seguro que muchas personas cambiaron de ser pasivos a ser activos. Entonces la educación sí funciona para tratar de convencer a las personas, una por la parte intelectual y otra por la parte emocional, de moverlos de ser observadores pasivos a gente activa. Y la pregunta que él mismo responde dice que qué pasaría si no hubiera habido educación del Holocausto hoy con el antisemitismo, que aunque ha aumentado, él dice que estaría mucho peor el antisemitismo hoy si no hubiera educación del Holocausto. Hoy. That's it. Tocayo, questions?
Yeah, Michael, I have one more question. People go to Anne Frank's house in Amsterdam and they become very, very emotional and very emphatic about the visit. However, like they come out and they forget what happened, and somehow anti-Semitism in Europe is growing. What happens to those people that visit those places like Anne Frank's house or Auschwitz or any of the death camps, any of the concentration camps? or whatever they read in the newspapers? Why don't they speak up?
We all worry about the increase of anti-Semitism in the world. I would say that for many years, we transmitted the lesson of the Holocaust was remember and don't let the world forget. We now have to change it, not only to remember and don't let the world forget, but never again, and never again starts with me. In other words, it happens through me. Therefore, I have to model positive behavior. Again, let's go back. I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be, God forbid, a killer. I don't want to be a bystander. What do I want to be? I do want to be an upstander. And education does not happen all at once. Education takes time. It takes reinforcement. It goes against lots of things. People lack courage. People are conformist. People are afraid of being unpopular. So I worry I worry more about the people who don't visit these places than the impact of visiting the places. By the time we get people into Holocaust education, we've already succeeded at something. They understand it's important. And that becomes, somebody used today, Stephanie used the word, it's a mission. And we are trying to salvage something from the ashes to make sure it's not a total loss.
Yeah, let me translate. Mi pregunta fue, ¿por qué si mucha gente va a la casa de Ana Frank, y a campos de concentración y campos de exterminio y museos, y salen muy conmovidos, por qué el antisemitismo ha aumentado en muchas partes del mundo, en particular en Europa? Y me contesta Michael que sí, es cierto, ha aumentado el antisemitismo en Europa, y sin embargo es importante seguir educando a la gente, que la educación lleva tiempo, y que debemos primero hacer que no se vuelva, la gente no olvide, que la gente se eduque, que aprenda, y que la gente haga algo para que la gente recuerde lo que pasó y evite que vuelva a suceder. En resumen, eso es lo que él menciona. Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
Michael, there's another question from somebody in the public. He said that he's in a judicial process in Serbia where he's trying to recover the property from his father. And he's asking for, maybe some pointers, some help, or an organization that can help him recover some of the property that it owes to him from his father.
Tell him to email me, and I will put him in touch with somebody in Serbia who will know, if not who himself can help, he will know if somebody can help and who the person is to help.
Ok, una persona del público preguntó que tiene un proceso judicial en Serbia por la propiedad de su papá. Dice que por favor le mande un email directo a Michael y lo pondrá en contacto con alguien en Serbia que a lo mejor lo puede ayudar. And the other question they have from the public is, with so many museums of the Holocaust, like you are, especially you, that you are building 7 or 8 museums throughout your lifetime, how do you explain that there is so many public people going to these museums all over the world? What would be a rational explanation of this?
The rational explanation is essentially, let me brag a little bit, we build good museums and we make the museums an experience. An experience that informs intellectually, moves emotionally, and has something that, let me step back. When I create museums, I create museums that begin with the idea that we are a storytelling institution. We tell a story. Now, you understand story has an incredible power. What is the Bible? A story. right? Everybody knows about Adam and Eve. Everybody knows about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, about Moses and Pharaoh. It's a story. Stories have power. Story is one of the oldest forms of communication. Now, in the modern world, we have three elements of storytelling. In addition to oral stories, tradition has always been transmitted by oral stories. Everybody remembers the stories that are told to them by their grandparents. If you ever go out on a date, what is the first thing you do? You ask your date, tell me about yourself. What's your story? Right? Your children have heard your story so many times that they can even recite it themselves and correct it. What do we do with the music? Three means of storytelling in the modern world. You have the novel, which is read alone. You have a movie, and a movie has a captive audience and moving imagery. You had one choice. You could pay attention to the documentary or not. The imagery moved. You were captive. A museum is the opposite. The museum has a moving audience and captive imagery. The audience moves, the imagery stays where it is. And the idea is we try to get people to move in order to get the story. And if we do it right, then the museum itself becomes very interesting because it tells a story. And my view is that the Holocaust is such a powerful event that many visitors, if not most visitors, regard it as a compelling story. And they make the connections between the world of the Holocaust and what they experience today.
Ok. La pregunta de alguien del público fue, habiendo tantos nuevos museos del Holocausto en el mundo, ¿por qué hay tanta asistencia? Nada más para recordarles al público que Michael, además de ser rabino conservador, se dedica básicamente hoy en día a construir museos en el mundo de la Shoah, del Holocausto. Y dice lo siguiente, para que un museo sea exitoso de este tipo, siendo el Holocausto un gran evento, hay que informar intelectualmente al visitante, pero también hay que moverlo emocionalmente. A diferencia de un documental que es imágenes y a una audiencia captiva, en un museo, en un documental, la audiencia es captiva y se mueven las imágenes. En un museo la experiencia es diferente. La gente se mueve y las imágenes son captivas. Entonces, la idea es interesar al público, relacionarlo con algo de él para que sea una experiencia de manera fuerte e inolvidable. Por eso un buen museo es muy exitoso si logra compenetrar a la persona con las imágenes y con la información. And probably the last question, Michael, for me, would be one from the public and something I always wanted to ask you. What is the relationship, the powerful relationship of the Holocaust, like somebody calls it, the mother of all genocides, and all the genocides that have happened since then and still are happening today? I mean, what's
that's a very good question. The Holocaust is the most complex and the most sustained of all the genocides. It occurred over 12 years in 23 different countries. It involved two great monotheistic religions, and it involved all of Western culture. But there are scholars who study genocide who say that there are things that all genocides share in common. We have a museum we did in Dallas that deals with the history of genocide by dealing with the stages of genocide. All genocides, for example, have symbolization. The symbol of the Jew was the yellow star. The symbol in Cambodia were glasses. Symbol in Cambodia were carrying books. All genocides have discrimination. All genocides have polarization, us and them, right? In Germany, you had Germans, Aryans, and Jews. All genocides also, ironically, have denial at the end. The criminal denies the crime, and in Germany, we're better off than in other genocides because the new Germany understood it had to admit the crime and go forward. And therefore, what you have in Germany is that the government, look, we live in a world of paradox. The president of Iran denied the Holocaust, Ahmadinejad. President of Germany admitted the Holocaust. In a normal world, who should deny the Holocaust? The perpetrators. And Iran, which had a perfect record and did not kill Jews, there were no pogroms in Iran. Iran served as a way station for Jews trying to get to Palestine, Free State Israel. Iran should have said, look at you Westerners, look what you did. Instead, Iran denies the Holocaust, and the president of Germany admits it. The president of Germany admits it because he wants to build Germany on a foundation that is anti-Holocaust, that is anti-genocide. So every genocide has things that are in common. The Holocaust has things that are distinct. And the one thing we now know is that the memory of the Holocaust calls attention to genocides, but that may not be sufficient because you need people who are willing to respond to and react to genocide. The best example is, and today everybody has a cell phone, and we can see the destruction taking place as it's happening. 2 generations ago, when the Holocaust was taking place, information came out slowly and only much later. So we have no excuse for standing by in genocide, but we have political inaction and excuses being offered by governments as they do what they do.
Tocayo,
That's a short answer to a very complex question.
Okay, Tocayo, ¿quieres?
No. That's Michael, as always, it's a privilege.
No, ¿quieres traducirlo?
No, si lo quiero traducir. Ok.
Sí.
No, tú, I'm sorry.
Ok. La pregunta, Michael, fue, ¿qué relación fuerte hay entre el Holocausto, la Shoah, y los genocidios modernos desde 1948 a la fecha? Básicamente, Michael contesta que el Holocausto fue un evento que se desarrolló durante 12 años en el choque de 2 grandes básicamente la cultura occidental estuvieron involucrados en el Holocausto, en el Shoah. Y a reserva de los genocidios modernos que obviamente son mucho más pequeños, menos involucrados en muchos países, tienen símbolos comunes, por ejemplo, la polarización. Ellos contra los perpetradores contra las víctimas, o los arios contra los judíos, o el gobierno sirio contra su propia gente. En Camboya, un simbolismo muy importante era el uso de los lentes y los libros, porque el Khmer Rouge, la campaña era contra la gente y los maestros educados y favoreciendo a los campesinos. En el caso de los judíos fue la estrella. En el caso de otros genocidios también hay la simbolización, el aislamiento. Casi todos los genocidios, los perpetradores terminan negando sus crímenes. Y como paradoja, Michael nos cuenta que en Alemania, el país que fue el perpetrador principal, el presidente de Alemania acepta el Holocausto como base para la construcción de una sociedad que va a negar el futuro de otro holocausto, de otro genocidio. En cambio, agarras el ejemplo de Irán, que era un magnífico ejemplo que nunca hubo pogroms contra los judíos, nunca asesinaron judíos, y el presidente de Irán, Ahmadinejad, niega el holocausto. Entonces son las paradojas de la historia que se nos presentan, pero siempre hay que tratar de luchar para que esto no suceda.
Okay. Michael, as usual, it's a privilege listening to you. We thank you for your time, and it was really a pleasure. Most people that have listened to your lectures always want to listen to you some more. So maybe in the near future, we're going to bother you again and ask you to help us with some of the themes that nobody does it better than you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's an incredible pleasure to consider you a great friend, a professor, a teacher, and it's never amazing how clear your mind is explaining concepts and things, and it's a joy to listen to you.
Thank you very much. Stay healthy, stay safe.